and welcome. You're watching the Newstrack. I'm Rahul Kanwal. On the show this evening, one of the world's leading economic commentators, Martin Wolf, says India will be a superpower by 2047. I'll be interviewing Martin Wolf in just a moment from now and try and understand what needs to be done from here going forward for India to actually achieve that dream, to be a superpower in 100 years of getting independence. Also on the show, the Supreme Court affidavit by the centre makes clear the centre has no intention of conducting NEET again. Has enough emerged in the investigation for the NEET exam to stay as is? Does the National Testing Agency deserve a second chance, or should it be done away with? Those are my top focus areas on the Newstrack.
Suspense over NEET-UG continues. Lakhs of students left in the lurch. Should NEET-UG 2024 be scrapped? Should there be a NEET-UG retest? Who will clean up the exam mess? Big focus on Newstrack.
There seems to be no end to the big NEET exam mess. The future of lakhs of students hangs in limbo. With the hearing in the Supreme Court being deferred till next week, the centre says there is no need to cancel the NEET undergraduate exam since there was no mass paper leak. But in India Today, investigation has revealed more glaring discrepancies.
The battle over the NEET undergraduate exam mess is far from over. The Supreme Court on Thursday postponed the hearing on petitions seeking cancellation of the medical entrance exam held earlier this year, citing paper leak. The matter will be taken up on July 18th. Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud's bench deferred the hearing at the request of the petitioners' lawyers, who sought time to review affidavits filed by the Union Government and the National Testing Agency. The government's affidavit filed on Wednesday, quoting a data analytics report by IIT Madras, claimed that no mass malpractice or localized candidate advantage has taken place. The analysis reported normal mark distribution and an overall score increase across all centres. IIT Madras report on NEET results identified 25% reduction in syllabus as a factor for the higher score. The National Testing Agency, which conducts the exam, also filed an affidavit stating that its analysis of top 100 candidates showed they are from 95 centres in 18 states and union territories. The CBI, which has arrested many suspects in the Bihar paper leak, has taken over investigation into the irregularities in Gujarat. The CBI told a local court, citing police probe, that irregularities took place at 2 exam centres in Godhra. Many candidates from Bihar, Odisha, Rajasthan, Maharashtra and UP took their exams there. The same operators controlled both centres. They allegedly encouraged candidates to choose Gujarati as their exam language. These candidates were advised to mention Panchmahal or Vadodara as their permanent address. The CBI has arrested Dikshit Patel, the owner of Jai Jalaram School in Godhra, and 5 others. Voices within the government and from opposition are demanding a clean-up.
जब मेरे से बच्चे पूछते हैं तो मैं क्या कहूँगा कि हमारी सरकार ने इसके बारे में क्या सोचा है, नहीं सोचा। हमारी सरकार ने इसके बारे में सोचा है। ये नीट का जो एग्जाम है, इसके बारे में कुछ ना कुछ करना पड़ेगा, नहीं तो आने वाले समय के अंदर राजनीति के अंदर, सरकार के अंदर बच्चों की आस्था खत्म हो जाए।
वो 24 लाख बच्चे जानते हैं कि इस एग्जाम में क्या हुआ था। तो आप हो सकता है कि आप सुप्रीम कोर्ट में आप जीत जाओगे, मध्य पब्लिक के दिल में नहीं जीतोगे। याद रखना, पब्लिक अलग है और कोर्ट अलग है।
Amid the clamour for accountability, Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan met panic-stricken NEET undergraduate aspirants on Thursday. It's not just NEET that is under scanner. The UGC NET exam was recently cancelled. The results of CUET exam for college admissions are delayed. The NEET for postgraduate admissions has been rescheduled for August 11th after a last-minute cancellation. The credibility of competitive exams in India are at stake. Bureau Report, India Today.
The union government's argument in the Supreme Court is that yes, there were some discrepancies in the conduct of the NEET exam, but these are very minor. Most of those who seem to have had some kind of advance access to the questions were not the ones who seem to have done well, and therefore, on the whole, there is no need for the NEET exam to be conducted afresh. Is that an argument which holds? Should NEET continue in the way that it is? Should the National Testing Agency be given a second chance, an opportunity to improve its act, or should it be scrapped altogether? Joining me on this broadcast, I want to welcome first Zubin Malhotra, well-known career coach, counselor at Career Guidance India. And we've got Nandini Saini, she's a NEET aspirant. Anvi Gupta is also a NEET aspirant. Both of them are in favor of NEET being done again. To speak against the cancellation of the NEET exam, we've got Dr. Sarasri Neeru, she's a doctor. She's saying cancel NEET. We've got Keshav Karunakar, who's a parent of a NEET aspirant, and we've got Devansh Raj Srivastav, who again is a NEET aspirant. I want to go across to Zubin Malhotra first. Your argument is that NEET should be done again. Now, given the fact that 23 odd lakh students conducted the exam, and from what we've gathered from the investigation so far, there were some discrepancies but not major. It's not like there's a mass leak. There were minor pockets of leak. And from what the centre says in the Supreme Court, those who benefited by getting early access to the paper don't seem to be amongst the toppers. And therefore, the centre argues there is no reason for NEET to be scrapped altogether. Why do you think that this should not be the case? Why do you think we need a re-NEET?
Rahul, the centres claim that just because those who had access to the paper couldn't cheat well or couldn't do well enough with it is not an argument that the process has not been vitiated. There have been n number of discrepancies, right from the registrations to grace marks to extra times to things not being made open and public. So obviously the entire process has many question marks over it. In such a scenario, and you're talking about admitting a fresh batch of doctors who are going to be the health service professionals for the country for the future, to not reconduct the exam, which is completely above board, completely devoid of any of this controversy, is the correct way forward.
No, but why should those who've studied hard, made all this effort, done well in their exams, have to pay for the deeds of a few who tried to cheat? And according to the centre's affidavit in the Supreme Court, many don't even seem to have succeeded. I mean, the ones who got access to the paper in advance are also the ones who don't necessarily have done well, who haven't necessarily done well.
Yes, but the point is that can you say for a certain that nobody who had access to this, or that everyone who had access to this has been weeded out, or that there has been no discrepancy in how marks have been awarded or how they've been inflated?
No, but is it fair to inconvenience 22 lakh students? Because A, there is uncertainty. B, you'll have to give a certain number of weeks, 6 to 8 weeks for an exam to be held again. Then there is the whole counselling process. By the time it concludes, at least one semester would be jeopardized. Is that fair to all the students whose fate hangs in balance?
Unfortunately not, but that is the price that, a not well conducted and a watertight process is. And hopefully the learnings from this experience get translated not just into if a re-NEET happens, but also into the other exams conducted by the NT. Fairness has to be the overriding principle.
Keshav Karunakar is a parent of a NEET aspirant. He says absolutely no REET. He doesn't want it to be done again. You're hearing from Zubin saying that till the time you are sure that every single every single aspirant who clears the exam and then goes on to becomes a doctor came through kosher, you cannot take a risk because these are people's lives we would be jeopardizing if we let some of these hanky-panky candidates go through.
Yeah, so Rahul, let me bring the perspective. How many doctors this year will become? 1 lakh people. Okay. 50,000 will go into government college, 50,000 go into private college. People will go in private college. These are the guys who may not go at scoring 650, but 350, 380, 390, because they have the money to go. So we will have students who have not got good marks and going to the college. We will not stop that. Let's come back to 50,000 government students, right? And fight is for that only. I don't think fight is for private. Now 50,000 students who have qualified, do you think that they have qualified because of malpractice? I challenge this hypothesis. Why I challenge this hypothesis? I have been in Bangalore for 3 coaching institutes award function because my daughter has scored 695 and she was in the top ranker, so they called me. Not a single person who scored 650 and above. Coaching institutes can tell that this guy has got because of the malpractice. Not a single guy. And again, I'm telling to all students also, anybody saying that there's a malpractice for 50,000 students who have qualified, find out who is your friend who has qualified, who has not, should not be there. Now coming back to malpractices that has happened, let's go back and look into malpractice wise. Paper leak. I can guarantee you, if paper leak is not at mass level, paper leak can help students who are scoring 600 and above. Anyone scoring average cannot use paper leak to qualify NEET, and that is what is NTA is trying to prove, and I agree, completely agree, because of the nature of the exam, right? Question paper are shuffled, options are shuffled, answers are shuffled, so average student who is just trying to remember answer overnight will not able to cross. Now come back to the problem statement that is there. April month, there was 25,000 people who registered. NTA should tell what is the result of those 25,000 students. That is what they should bring the trust. The bigger problem that is there in the system, as of today for 50,000 students I'm talking about, is Munna by MBBS. Somebody is impersonating that. That has happened in Muzaffarpur, where Prayagraj doctor's son got somebody else to give exam. Someone who is fixing the center. You know, Rahul, nobody is talking about this. Godhra, people got from Jharkhand, Bihar, Maharashtra to go to Godhra. How did they get this center? When center gets allocated 1 day before and 2 days before, we don't know how this is. And on those centers, how many such centers were fixed? Right? That is the problem. Nobody is talking about it. Now,
and the fact that there were students who are clearly either Hindi or English speaking who were writing in Gujarati. I mean, all these students who came from different states like Bihar, like Jharkhand, they are highly unlikely to have known Gujarati. Then how did they write their exams in Gujarati? That's the story that my colleague Brajesh Doshi did, and that's something which really reeks of serious problems in the system. And let me put that question, Nandini Saini, because if you've got English/Hindi speaking writing students filling out the exams in Gujarati, it means there's something terribly wrong with the state of NEET. Therefore, do you think that the exam should be held again, or do you agree with what Keshav Karunakar is saying? He says, no, there should be no exam because it's unfair to his daughter. She studied hard, she's done well. Why should she be made to go through this torture? And how do we know whether she'll get the same kind of score again? So Karunakar doesn't want to take a risk.
Sir, I disagree with sir what he has said earlier, that the exam should not be held again. The exam should definitely be held again. I am one of those candidates who got 660 marks, more than 650. I will be getting a college, but I will not be getting the college that I was supposed to get. I'm a resident of Delhi. I should have gotten a college in Delhi, but I'm not getting one. And the cases that he just described right now about impersonation, leaks, and the registration window that was specially opened in the month of April. How has the government not given any answers for these questions? How is it, and why is it that they are taking so much time to describe all these answers? If genuine students gave the examination, they studied hard, they've gotten the marks that they were getting prior to if RENEET has to be held, and if RENEET is held again, they will definitely get those marks again. If not those marks...
No, but there can be no guarantee, because I remember that I took the GMAT, I got 710. Now, there are times when I may have scored 690, 700. There was the odd time when I may have scored 730, 720 in the mock exams. So I remember from my own example that there is no guarantee if I took the same paper again that I would get the same marks. Thoda upar, thoda niche, both of this is possible. I mean, it can be argued by those who don't agree with your point of view that because you got 660, you think if you took the paper again, you could get a little bit more, which is why you're pushing for the exam to be done again. So it really comes down to individual choice and what you think might happen.
See, I agree. I have given a lot of mock tests myself. Either I will get more marks or the marks lesser than what I've scored originally, right? But this is not just about Nandini Saini here. It is about all the 23 lakh candidates who gave NEET this year. I'm not the only one who's sailing in the boat alone. Each and every kid who gave NEET is sailing in the same boat. Segregating all those people, if they were supposed to segregate those people, shouldn't they have done that earlier? Why are they taking so much time? And if they say that no leak has happened on a massive scale, then why is it that the CBI is still investigating all these other kids who were involved in the fraud? And why is it that they're still doing some arrests right now, at the very moment that we're speaking? There is no answer for these questions.
Okay. Let me put that question to Devansh Raj Srivastav. You don't want the exam to be cancelled, but every week new discrepancies emerge. Students from Jharkhand, Bihar going to Gujarat, writing the paper in Gujarati. I mean, the level of the scam seems to keep increasing. It may not be mass, but cheating is bad enough, and therefore it's being argued that, you know, there's so much doubt that's been created. The only way it can be cast aside is that if you wash the slate and start afresh, do the exam again.
Sir, because the thing is that the reconducting the whole retest for all the 24 lakh applicants, it is seriously a hectic situation for all of us, because, sir, when we prepare for this competitive exams now, in the last 2 months, it is so much hectic schedule for all the students who really work hard, barely work hard for to get enrolled into the medical colleges, for studying for the 17 hours, studying for 15 hours a day, because it will be a very hectic schedule for all of us if we if the retest is to be conducted again. So I don't think so that there is any need to conduct the whole retest for all the 24 lakh applicants. And sir, there were malpractices. Yes, obviously we all know that there were some malpractices in the other states also, Jharkhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Godhra. And sir, the thing is that what is a major thing is happening now, there is time loss for all of us, because sir, the counselling has to be conducted in the July 1st week, and it has not been delayed to the 3rd week. The loss what is happening is mainly to the students only. The counselling has been delayed.
Yeah, for everybody else, it's a matter of debate, a matter of discussion. It's the students who are the actual ones who suffer. Sarasri Niru, you're a doctor. You're saying cancel NEET. Why should the exam be cancelled? I mean, given the fact that about 24 lakh students appeared in the undergraduate exam, 4,750 centers, 571 cities, 14 international equations. It's so mammoth. I mean, because there were some stray instances of wrongdoing, should the entire exam be scrapped?
NEET lost its credibility due to the recent paper leakage and its irregularities. NEET exam patterns favors only students who can afford private coaching institutions, and which does not afford students who cannot afford private institutions, private coaching institutions, but who can secure high marks in class 12. Because of loss of coaching centers, they lost their dreams to pursue medicine, as their dreams to never get fulfilled. It is in the form of social injustice, social justice. It is in the form of, its question is in the form of social justice. How can the students from the different states studying +2 under a different syllabus can expect to be well versed in one NCERT syllabus, and how difficult it can be? It is mandatory to violate NEET. It is mandatory to violate NEET because of it is a health and education must be a state subject. So education and health must be brought back under the state list.
Okay, so you're making a larger argument against the very format of the NEET exam itself, that it inconveniences and is biased against those who've studied in state boards, because it largely draws from the NCERT, CBSE syllabus, and therefore for those who come from state boards, they don't have an equal opportunity, and it goes against that. Zubin, you want to come in on that? that the state boards, because the counter argument is that if it's only held at the state level, then the scope of discretion is much more. Many meritorious students are actually left out. Whoever can pay capitation, whoever can find a way of bribing some of these colleges can find a way of going in, and therefore you need a standardized test, whether it's SAT, GRE, GMAT. These are standard exams. There's no jugaad that you can do in them. You need to go out, sit, study and clear the papers.
Rahul, the answer to this lies, talk to any student or parent 20, 25 years ago who was running from city to city, state to state, trying to figure out which exam to give, which not to give. And because every state used to have its own medical and engineering entrance exam, AIMS would then have a separate one and JIPMER would have a separate one. And it was absolute chaos. And obviously, a student sitting in one part of the country would not be able to get a fair shot at other medical colleges across the country. So yes, you do need a nationalized standard entrance exam. Then the way that the current NEET-UG is being done, can it be made better? Most certainly. And a couple of years ago, there was a harmonizing of syllabus across central and state boards, especially in the science subject areas. So I think that to a large extent has been covered. You can increase the number of languages in which the exam is conducted, which makes it an even more level playing field for students from across the country. However, what I find as a personal peeve really is that this one exam once a year, once a day, why cannot important exams like these or engineering or law be conducted 6 times in a year? You have a large enough question bank.
No, they can be done 6 times in a year, but then how would you get admission? Because if they happen at different times and these are staggered,
so
how would you do counseling?
Whenever and you pick your best score, and at the time when is the cutoff for the counseling, you will submit your best score from the previous 12 months.
No, but I end up wasting a year because of this.
No, you don't. You give that exam during your class 12, or if students who are dropping out, as in so for.
That's very easy for you to say because you're no longer in class 12. But if I'm in class 12, I have to study for my class 12 exam. How will I find time to study for NEET?
They're barely going to school. They're all anyway preparing for engineering and medicine. And God forbid, you wake up on the morning of the NEET exam, you have a bad head cold, you have a fever, your whole year is gone. So that's the counter to what you're saying.
No, that's a fair point. The fact that exams, as is the case internationally, are held on you can actually pick a date when you want to do it. Whenever you feel confident, you can go out and give the exam. And these are on computers, so it's not as if you have to sit and write on paper. I mean, that really is very basic, and we should be heading in that direction. I want to go across to Anvi Gupta. She says there should be scrapping and a fresh exam. Anvi, why do you think that, given all that we're hearing and seeing, why do you think the exam should be scrapped? Is that not unfair to those who did well?
Sir, it's unfair to both the parties, to the re-NEET who want re-NEET and to the ones who doesn't want no re-NEET. So the problem is it is not in the demands that someone is wanting re-NEET, someone is wanting no re-NEET. Problem is that the leaks, the irregularities are not being solved. We are also, if they accept that there has been irregularities, if they work upon it, if they solve this 25,000 puzzle that they registered on 9 to 10th April, if they investigate it, if they are so, I would say, focused, determined to do this, of course, no one would want re-NEET again. But are they accepting it? The question lies is, are they accepting the leaks? Are they, which they have made arrest in the other states as well? Are they writing that in the report? Are they accepting that?
Keshav Karunakar, this whole idea of the National Testing Agency itself and whether we should have a NEET exam. Some of the students feel that this is disadvantageous to state board students, which it is, because if you study in Delhi, because I've studied while I was growing up, because my dad was in the army, I studied in army schools, I studied in Kendra Vidyalayas, I studied in Tony public schools, all kinds of schools. And there is a big difference. And if you're studying a state board and you have to compete with somebody who goes to school in the big cities, there is a very big difference, and therefore it's disadvantageous to people who don't have the equal opportunity.
You're asking me, Rahul?
Yes, I am, Mr. Karunakar.
Yeah, so Rahul, I'll tell you, we have been, whatever you were saying, that we have been a state going different places to give tests. It was really more chaotic and more corrupt than whatever it is today.
Right? You go back and see the education department and engineering exams and medical exams. Politicians' daughters have become doctor and engineers full of this. Okay. Now I'll come back to your problem. That the state board guys getting disadvantaged. Whatever I have seen the state board syllabus, more and more is getting aligned to NCERT. It is not about NCERT books and syllabus. As of today, the problem statement that we have today about the NEET. See, credibility has been lost by NTA. Exam, again I'm telling you, 50,000 students are not, everybody has got cheated and reached there. Okay, and that is what my hypothesis, that suppose Neeraj Chopra has won gold medal, some student has done, some participant has done doping, should not cancel the whole Olympics.
Okay.
Just take the medal from that guy and give it to other guy, right? So here, what Supreme Court is saying, find out the guys who have got benefit out of this malpractice, remove from the queue, and it is doable. One example I gave you.
No, but it's much tougher to determine who's cheated. You know, it's not easy. Whether there's been cheating is easier to figure out than to figure out who specifically has cheated. There are no easy, clear answers. This is not a yes or no. There are many shades of grey. The fact that students from state boards are inconvenienced and have a slight disadvantage against those who've studied the NCERT, CBSE syllabus is very clear. The fact also is that there is more homogeneity, but is that good? Because states like Tamil Nadu argue they want to be able to have their own syllabus without having to worry about what the center is teaching. They want to be able to teach their own subject. So there are many complexities at play here. We've been able to touch upon some of those. I just hope that there is clarity, because if you're a student and you don't know whether the exam is happening again or whether what you took is what stands, it just creates a lot of uncertainty, which can play all kinds of mind games with people. Students, parents, families, friends. I hope that this gets settled. You know, I saw how in the courts very casually this was pushed by a week. That's not right. I mean, 24 lakh students took the paper. I mean, there's at least 1 crore people involved in the whole ecosystem, if not more. You have to take this seriously, my lord. You cannot just so casually be giving Tariq pe Tariq. Doesn't work. I'm out of time. I want to thank all our guests for joining us. India is likely to be the world's next superpower. This is something the Indian government, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, has been saying again and again. Now, Martin Wolf, the chief economics commentator at the Financial Times, has written a widely read piece where he talks about why India will become a superpower. So I've got live with us at this time Martin Wolf from the Financial Times, joining us from London. Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. It's a pleasure to have you with us. We've been tracking your articles and your work for a long time, but I don't think any other piece has been shared quite as widely as the one where you predict that India will likely be a superpower. So can you start by explaining to those who are watching at this time why you think India is well poised to be the next world superpower?
Well, I suppose it comes down to just a few things. First, as everybody knows, India is a very, very, very big country with a larger population than any other country, and that advantage will continue to grow. So, as I point out, and plausibly by the middle of this century, it will have an appreciably bigger population than China, and probably at least 4 times that of the US. So if India gets its output per person to, say, a quarter of the US level, which is considerably below what China has today, over the next 25 years, which seems to me a pretty plausible outcome, it assumes essentially that economic growth continues on roughly the same trend as since 1990. It's been quite stable. There have been ups and downs, but quite stable. If it continues at that rate for another quarter of a century, India will have achieved GDP per head at least a quarter of the US levels in real terms. And therefore its aggregate economy will be as big as the US. It will not be as big as China, which I expect under quite conservative assumptions to be the biggest. But it will be clearly in a class with those other two. And these will be far and away the 3 biggest economies in the world.
What are the key milestones you'd be looking at? Is this trend, do you think, inevitable, or are there key markers that you'll be tracking very closely to see whether India stays on this journey to be an advanced economy by the middle of this century?
Well, It's certainly not inevitable. This is absolutely clear. The history of growing economies is that sustaining, say, just 5 or 6% growth with what is we are talking about, not China's 10 or so, over what then be 60 years is a remarkable achievement. I mean, that's happened to other countries, but it's not common, and things can go wrong. You can have political instability, you can have at home, you can have major upheavals in the world economy. I do discuss in my article one of the most important, which is growing protectionism in the world, but I suggest that gives India some real opportunities too, because it is in quite a favored position. And of course, policy has to be stable and pro-growth. And in India's case, that includes, I think, strengthening industry. I think it's quite important for industry to continue to be dynamic. I think it's important that India continue to succeed in the world economy, to be attractive to inward investment, to generate exports, and of course to generate a growth which uses as much of the population as possible. So there are lots of things that have to go right. But I think that India has done well enough. It looks to me politically stable enough. It has clearly the human resources it needs to sustain this growth, and I think it's a reasonable bet.
The big debate in India comes down to per capita GDP. How much does each person in our population, what is his average level of wealth? And there India currently stands at about $2,500. This is as per the International Monetary Fund data from April 2024. Now, 13,845 is the current classification for per capita income to classify as a developed country according to the IMF. Do you think we're on the path to be able to lift many in our population to those kind of levels? Because the big debate in India is around income inequality and whether the rich are getting richer, there's a higher concentration of capital amongst the uber rich, and whether the benefits are adequately going down the income pyramid.
Well, I think that, and I've discussed this too, that the chances, well, that the challenge of becoming a genuinely developed, all-round developed country with a per capita income comparable to that of the developed countries, that challenge over the next quarter of a century is enormous. And I think it's very unlikely. I use slightly different numbers, which I won't go into in detail because it's a bit technical, but I think very crudely, growth in GDP per head would have to rise to about 8% a year, 7.5 to 8% a year to become a developed country by 2047, which was, of course, the Prime Minister's objective. That will be an extraordinary achievement. But if we assume that India continues at a growth rate of 4.5% to 5% in per capita income, perhaps a little bit more over that period, it will clearly be well into the upper middle income category, which is where China is now, and it would be a considerably more prosperous country than today, at least twice as rich, and the per head. And I think that's achievable. But it certainly, I wouldn't pretend for a moment it's going to be easy. But becoming actually a high-income country under plausible assumptions by 2050 is, I think, a bit of a stretch. By 2060 or 2070, it's perfectly possible if the world remains reasonably safe. But this is getting on for half a century. It's a long time to think about.
You know, the IMF managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, in her recent post, talks about how the world faces a decade of tepid growth and popular discontent, because India doesn't rise by herself. India rises in a global context. The headwinds at this moment are anti-globalization. Countries are becoming more insular, inward-looking. Therefore, how do these global headwinds potentially impact India's rise versus the golden period for China, where China was growing at a time when globalization was the flavor of the world at that time?
There's no doubt it will make it more difficult, and I take this into account. I mean, remember, during its heyday, as you said, up to about 2012, China was growing at about 10% a year, and that was helped by its exports growing even faster. Now, I don't think the world economy would absorb that, and I also don't think India is likely to achieve that for a whole host of reasons, which we can't go into. It would be an extraordinary acceleration if India got anything close to that. But let's also assume that India grows at, say, as I said, 5 or 6%, not 10. Assume the world economy growth is slow, so it's 3% or so. That means India's growth will be about twice as fast as the world economy. And of course, I also argue that would require probably exports to grow twice as fast as world exports, because at the moment, world trade and world GDP are growing at roughly the same rate. Now, that looks quite a stretch. But remember, at the moment, India is still a very small share of world exports. Merchandise exports, if I remember correctly, just a couple of percent. It's much better in services, but even then, China and the US and other countries, UK, are well ahead of it. So I think India can grow faster than the world economy. India's exports can grow faster than the world economy, and India can grow faster unless the world economy collapses. And I argue that that doesn't seem very likely, short of a major war, which is, of course, unpredictable and horrifying to think about. So that is possible for India. It will require good policy, and it will require, in my view, that India continues to trust that it can compete in world trade. And here India has some huge advantages. It is seen as a broadly friendly nation by Western countries. It has good relations with countries in the south, obviously not with China, but with others. And India is an obvious +1 country. We're trying to diverge.
So let's spend a moment on that, because
so it's all good.
So I want to spend a moment on this China +1 opportunity. In your column, you describe India as a positive connector country. To what extent, according to you, has India been able to benefit, or is in the direction of being able to benefit from the China +1 pivot in global supply chains? Is that benefit really coming towards India, or is it really going elsewhere and India getting a very small, suboptimal part of it?
I think it is clearly becoming a country people are thinking about hard in the West. But it is certainly not the first port of call. I mean, it's clear in the short run, Vietnam has been doing extraordinarily well. And it raises some big issues, because Vietnam is doing well in part because it's importing supplies, components and so forth from China. And that might become a difficulty. So there are questions about whether the US and European countries will accept imports from other countries like Vietnam or India, for that matter, which actually are made in significant measures with Chinese components. It's very difficult to avoid because China is far and away the biggest manufacturing country in the world. So that's a big question. And then, of course, the key issue is, does India offer the quality of infrastructure, the efficiency of administration, the attractions to invest foreign investors, which will persuade them that this is a completely
So what's your answer to that?
Base.
Because making India a manufacturing hub is one of the key pillars of the government's policy framework. To what extent do you think we've already succeeded in, through various incentives like production-linked incentives, through favorable taxation, corporate taxation regimes, to make India an attractive destination, and what more, according to you, Mr. Wolf, needs to be done?
I think it has clearly improved India's attractions. There's no doubt about that. Whether it's enough is, to me, not clear. It is important to stress that foreign investors still are very nervous about administrative obstacles. Will things really go perfectly smoothly? The infrastructure is improving massively. Is it up to Chinese levels yet? No. Obviously not. There's a concern about the quality of the labor force and the education and training. They need to be certain that work will proceed smoothly. So I would say people are looking at India very carefully. They are thinking about it hard, but the country hasn't yet been sold to the world as a base for manufacturing, exports. But of course, India also has the service possibility, which is a very big one. It's not just manufacturing, it's a very broad range of options. But I would say policy has to continue to improve if the government wants to get these sorts of results, but it's feasible.
How do the recent Lok Sabha election results impact India's growth curve? One argument is if India had a government with a very strong majority, they would have been able to push forward on the path of economic reform with greater purpose. That a coalition government to some extent, while the direction stays the same, but it might slow the intensity of reform. Could that push India's growth journey back in your view, Mr. Wolf?
It's very difficult for an outsider to guess precisely the connection between political realities and economic performance. My sense from my very recent trip is that this really shouldn't derail progress. It looks as though there will be a stable government. It will be somewhat chastened, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's part of democracy, and it shows the vibrant strength of Indian democracy. And I think it is quite likely, I hope, to persuade the government that economic reform and economic progress is the core thing they offer the Indian people. That's what they want. And so that's what they should focus on. And it didn't seem to me that there's any vast opposition to that in the country. People want a better life. So I hope that this will actually encourage a greater focus on, still greater focus on economic performance, which is, I think, what India needs and the Indian people deserve. So I'm optimistic on that. But I can't be sure. I mean, who does know what's going to happen politically?
India's growth, especially in the export side, has had a very strong services component. Now the question is, how do technological advancements, in particular artificial intelligence, tools like ChatGPT, how do they potentially impact some of those jobs which have really moved the Indian economy in the decades gone by, but some of those jobs now potentially are increasingly being automated and may not require Hyderabad or Bengaluru or Gurgaon or Noida?
That's a very big question, and I think it's a real concern. I mean, this is, of course, a concern worldwide, a huge concern. What is going to be the impact of this? I've read quite a bit about this, and at the moment I would say that people are not clear whether these are going to be substitutes or complements, or how far it will be one or the other. Are we going to actually massively reduce employment in the broadly defined service sector across the world, or are we going to find that workers are more efficient, but we will need more because we will be better off and we can do more, and that in fact humans and machines will turn out to be highly complementary. It is worth noting that while there is that really big question, India, of course, has the advantage that its service labour in all areas is cheaper and has a very large number of people who can do this. And so there's this general shift from the developed countries with high-cost labour to developing countries with lower-cost labour. And I think it's quite possible that will offset the effect of AI. But the honest truth, this is a very new, recent invention, innovation, and we don't know how that's going to play out. And the economy will have to be very flexible. It will change in many ways over the next 20 years or so, and this will be part of that adjustment.
Let's spend a moment by zooming out of India and looking at what's happening globally. And I want your broad interpretation of what the results in the United Kingdom and in France and other places where there have been elections recently. And in the UK, you've got a government with a very firm majority. That's not the case in France. How does all of this together impact global growth?
Well, very broadly, we are in a period of political instability. And one of the characteristics of that period is a lot of the politicians are not, as it were, operating within the system, they're operating against the system. So it's anti-system politics. And that creates vastly more uncertainty about the future of the politics in many high-income countries than we have before. And you can see that in the British election with the great success of Nigel Farage. Of course, you can see it in France. That's obvious. You could see that in the European Union elections. And you can clearly see that in the US, where Donald Trump represents exactly that. So we are in a period of extreme political uncertainty with the possibility of quite revolutionary developments, which are very, very difficult to predict. And of course, also, we are, and that's the other really big aspect, we have this emerging Cold War, as it were, between the West, broadly defined, and a bloc around China and Russia and Iran. This makes the world hugely unpredictable. In these situations, one of the most important features is rising nationalism. And rising nationalism is obviously anti-globalization, and we are seeing rising protectionism. That is one of the reasons for slowing world growth, and is certainly going to make world trade growth more difficult. But as I said before, I do believe of the major powers, India is particularly well positioned to take advantage of what opportunities there are. But there's no doubt there are very big uncertainties about the future development of the world and the world economy and the political regimes we're going to see.
In your view, is the trend towards this new Cold War likely to exacerbate? China, Iran, Russia, North Korea on the one side, a US-led bloc on the other. Is this likely to get worse, or do you think these two blocs will find a way of being able to, with tensions, coexist?
That's in a way the biggest geopolitical question. And there's another possibility which must be mentioned, that if Donald Trump becomes president, that the Western Bloc will fragment to a significant degree. So we would almost have a three-way split. The relatively optimistic view is that it would become a bit like the old Cold War, where the relationships were difficult, but head-on war was avoided, and the countries that were linked to the West at that stage did pretty well. But we were separate. The difficulty with that is, of course, we hope that we will avoid war. Of course we do. But the difficulty is, of course, China is fully part of the system. It's part of the world system. So cutting it out is almost impossible. The leaving aside friction leading to war, we can imagine that the events there. The really big question is whether protectionism becomes so enormous, and Donald Trump suggests it might, that relations really break down completely, and then we could have a sudden unraveling of world trade, a real reversal, as happened in the 1930s, and that disruption will be difficult to handle. Even so, as I suggest, India has very good relations with a lot of countries, and there are going to be a fair number of chances that it might be able to pick up.
Finally, it now seems more likely that Donald Trump is the front-runner to be the president of the United States. How could a Trump presidency impact global trade and, in the context of your piece, India's rise?
Well, at the moment, there's sort of slightly good news. Donald Trump has announced that he will impose a 60% tariff on China's goods and 10% tariffs on everybody else. Now, I don't know whether he will do that. He's a pretty unpredictable person. But if he did that, that would clearly enormously accelerate the shift of imports to the US from China to other countries. If it's done in the form I've just suggested, it's not, he doesn't look at the China content in exports to America, which he might do, but assuming he doesn't, that would create enormous opportunities for other countries to start exporting to the United States while importing some of the components and so forth from China. So I think it's not necessarily terribly harmful if that's all he does, is just an attack on China. Of course, China will retaliate against the US, but that again will create opportunities for other countries. So I think it is conceivable But you never know with Donald Trump that his bite for most countries would be worse than his bark. He's just a wildly unpredictable human being. But India, again, is probably pretty well positioned. He seems to like your prime minister. He seems to get on well with him. He doesn't express any hostility towards India. He sees it as most Americans do, as a potential ally, even if sort of slightly secret, well, semi-secret, against China. So I think even with Trump, the opportunities, at least for India, don't look to me to be too bad.
Finally, we've spoken so far as an economist, as a football fan. What's the data? What is purchasing power parity and the state of the two countries telling you about England versus Spain? Could the cup finally be coming home? What's your sense?
Well, my view is Spain is obviously the favourite for confidence record, but in any match of this kind between two teams, all of whose players are really top-class professionals, anything can happen. And I suppose I would be rather happy to see England win.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens over the weekend. Thank you very much for joining us, Martin Wu. Appreciate your thoughts. I'm sure a lot of people will be latching on to every word where you're thinking that India would be the world's next superpower, as they'd say. In our country, aapke muh mein ghee shakkar. Thank you very much for joining us on this broadcast. Martin Wolf of the Financial Times.
Great pleasure.